أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله الطاهرين. Before we continue with the verses as we discussed last week, I will talk briefly about this issue of uncleanness of Ahlul Kitab and Mushrikun. The verse that we recited last week, verse number 28, Ya ayyuhal ladhina amanu innamal mushrikuna najasun fala yaqrabu al-masjid al-haram ba'da amihim hadha. O you who have faith, the polytheists are indeed unclean, so they should not get near Masjid al-Haram after this year. It has raised, of course, lots of jurisprudential discussions about the cleanness and uncleanness, ritual purity or impurity of Ahlul Kitab and Mushrikun as well. And as we said last week, the verse really doesn't want to speak about the ritual uncleanness. It talks about the spiritual uncleanness of Mushrikun. And almost all Shi'i exegetes agree that even if they want to prove the ritual uncleanness of Mushrikun, they could not refer to this verse. Now, this issue of uncleanness of human being, because human being per se, without looking into considering their faith, is something which is of course very difficult to accept to be unclean. And this is why in Sunni jurisprudence the human being per se is clean, and this discussion of impurity and uncleanness of Mushrikun or Ahlul Kitab does not appear in Sunni books. It is something specific to Shia fiqh. It is one of the specialities of Shi'i jurisprudence rather than Sunni jurisprudence. So no Sunni would say that Mushrikun are najis, or no Sunni would say that Ahlul Kitab are najis. This is only one of the Shi'i particularities in their jurisprudence. Now, of course, this might sound more reasonable to accept the Sunni view that human beings, regardless of their faith, are clean, because when we look at human beings, especially in terms of ritual purity and impurity, the issue of najasa and tahara would seem irrelevant, and especially for those who have actually a life mixed with others, with Mushrikun, with Ahlul Kitab, this would make the whole life very difficult. And when they, of course, communicate and socialize with other people, and they see that except for very, very few issues, especially in practice, they are the same as others, then it would be very difficult to accept that some people should be impure ritually, and if you want to pray, you shouldn't touch them if you are wet, and otherwise you have to clean, you have to wash, or, for example, not eating with them, not eating from their food because they are impure. It would seem a bit difficult to accept. Now, if it has become one of the Shi'i special and particular issues, then it would tell us one very important thing, and that this is something disseminated and taught by A'imma alayhimus salam and not taught by the Prophet. of course, one might say that it might have been taught by the Prophet but forgotten. The hadith did not come to the jurists of later time, jurists who were the a'imma of the madhahib, like Abu Hanifa and Malik, Shafi'i. They did not actually have any hadith from the Prophet at their hand about the najasa of mushrikun and Ahlul Kitab, and this is why they have issued the fatwa that human being per se is clean, and there is no question of najasa of Ahlul Kitab or mushrikun. One very important factor which might have played a role in this is that probably at the time of the Prophet the rules of najasa and tahara, especially with regards to mushrikun, were not elaborated very much. And you see even this ayah about the mushrikun not getting near to Masjid al-Haram is something which has been revealed in the 9th year of the Prophet's hijrah, and 2 years before he passed away. And if this is the case, the mushrikun were very freely, of course, mixing with the Muslims, and even in the first year of Hajj, after the conquest of Mecca, the mushrikun could come to Mecca, could do their pilgrimage, and it was only in the 9th year that the Prophet announced, Allah actually announces this. So the question of impurity of mushrikun was not raised or was not mentioned, especially in a situation where people were lived in mixed families. I mean, some people had converted to Islam and their parents were mushrik, and vice versa, brothers were mushrik, sisters were Muslims. So it would have been very difficult to elaborate on these issues. If we accept the gradual revelation of jurisprudential issues at the time of the Prophet, as it is the case in many different questions, like for example the drinking of the wine, which was forbidden gradually at the time of the Prophet, we would see that it is not impossible that Prophet would have talked about this towards the end of his life, and many people would have not heard about this najasa of mushrikun and Ahlul Kitab. And it was later on elaborated by Ali ibn Abi Talib and by A'imma alayhimus salam, so it became a particular issue in Shi'i jurisprudence rather than in Sunni jurisprudence. Anyhow, for Sunnis, human being per se is clean, ritually clean, so there is no question of najasa. However, as I said, the rules of najasa and tahara is not that elaborate in Sunni jurisprudence as in Shi'i jurisprudence. Even, for example, about dog and pig, there is big controversy in Sunni jurisprudence about their cleanness and uncleanness. And even Malik, Imam Malik in Maliki jurisprudence would say that the leftover of pig and dog is clean. And this is something which would be abhorrent in Shi'i jurisprudence, certainly, because there are lots of elaborate issues about this in Shi'i jurisprudence which have come through the ahadith of A'imma of Ahlul Bayt, and this would tell us that probably those elaborations which was given to Ali ibn Abi Talib, especially in the book of Ali, were not found in Sunni jurisprudence, because the hadith about this was very scarce. It came towards the end of the life of the Prophet. Now, in Shi'i jurisprudence, there is a unanimous opinion that mushrikun and kuffar are najas, although we don't have much hadith about it. And where this ijma or unanimous opinion is formed goes back to the very, very early in the history of Shi'i jurisprudence, especially to the time of A'imma themselves. And there has been a difference of opinion about the najasa of Ahlul Kitab, whether they are pure or impure ritually, but about the najasa of mushrikun and kuffar, There has been no disagreement among Shi'i jurists. By mushrikun we mean the polytheists, those who associate someone with God, and by kuffar we mean those who do not believe in God at all, or do not accept the prophethood of our prophet, and they are not from Ahlul Kitab, or do reject one of the necessary concepts of Islam. These are the kuffar, and mushrikun are the polytheists. So there has been no difference of opinion about the najasa of mushrikun and kuffar. However, very recently in Qom, there has been an argument about this, that where is the reason that the mushrikun and kuffar are najas. And it is somehow, of course, these discussions are influenced by, first of all, the modern international communication, and secondly, by Sunni jurisprudence, which regards human being per se to be clean. And of course, those who are arguing this are in utter minority. There is an Ayatollah named Ayatollah Jannati, who is of course different from Ayatollah Jannati, who most of you might have heard possibly, who has put forward such ideas, but of course his ideas in this respect and in many other respects are very vehemently opposed by the majority of the ulama in Qom. You do not believe what type of discourse nowadays is going on in Qom. It is a very vibrant and lively city of jurisprudential discussions and even social discussions and philosophical discussions, and all these very unfashionable ideas in Shi'i jurisprudence, in traditional Shi'i jurisprudence, are being put forward and discussed and accepted or rejected. Now, some of the jurists who are not from mainstream jurisprudence, mainstream current of jurisprudence in Shi'i, have recently put forward this idea that human being per se is ritually clean. So no matter whether they are mushrik, kafir or Ahlul Kitab, they are clean. And of course this is, as I said, vehemently rejected by the mainstream jurisprudence, Shi'i jurisprudence. It violates the ijma', the unanimous opinion of all Shi'i jurists during the history. And therefore I don't think this idea is going to find any chance even in the future to become an established fatwa of Shi'i jurisprudence at all. Now, the disagreement right from the beginning of Shi'i jurisprudence was about Ahlul Kitab, not about mushrikun and kuffar. The Shi'i jurisprudence from its beginning had, of course, two different type of cores and centers. One was the center which was the center of traditionists and their opinions and their fatwa about different issues, and the other was the opinion of jurists who did not call themselves mujtahidun, but were using and were somehow thriving on the discussion which had developed in Sunni jurisprudence. They used almost the same method, of course, with the Shi'i material. Now, the followers of the first school were, of course, Kulaini, Shaykh al-Saduq, and people in that rank. And the followers of the second school were two very, very prominent and influential jurists called, one of them Ibn Abi Aqil al-Ummani and the other one Ibn Junayd al-Baghdadi, who were contemporaries of Kulaini and Saduq. So they had their own line of jurisprudence, which were drawing on the Sunni methods of jurisprudence with Shi'i material, and the others, of course, were traditionists like Saduq and Kulaini. Now, Saduq, Kulaini, and others, the traditionists, were of the view that Ahlul Kitab were najas. And of course, they the ahadith they used were somehow contradictory with each other. We have one batch of ahadith which say they are tahir, one batch of ahadith which they say they are not tahir, they are najas, and they of course gave preponderance to those ahadith which say they are najas. Ibn Abi Aqil and Ibn al-Junayd, of course, they said they are tahir, and they used their own method. Now, what happened later on? Some very, very prodigious and huge personality came around in Shi'i jurisprudence called Al-Shaykh al-Mufid. And of course, he was given the title, the nickname Mufid, because he was really, really inducing knowledge to everyone with the cleverness that he had. Some people make joke, they said there is no Shaykh al-Mufid after Shaykh al-Mufid, because the Shaykh could not be Mufid anymore after Shaykh al-Mufid. Mufid means someone who is useful. Now, he was really useful in Shi'i jurisprudence, because what he did, he actually used the traditionist method and introduced some of the methods of Ibn Abi Aqil and Ibn Junayd, and introduced the founding stones and the origins of the Shi'i jurisprudence that we have nowadays. It is a mixture of both methods, which came to be developed very extensively by his student Shaykh al-Tusi. Now, from that time, Shaykh al-Mufid, of course, chose the ahadith, chose to issue fatwa according to the ahadith which gave preponderance to the najasa of Ahlul Kitab. And therefore, this idea of najasa of Ahlul Kitab became the mainstream Shi'i fatwa, and the idea of tahara of Ahlul Kitab became the minority view among Shi'i jurists. Of course, the ideas of Ibn Abi Aqil and Ibn al-Junayd was continued to be discussed all the time and being accepted by some jurists during the Shi'i history, but it was minority. So right from the beginning of Shi'i jurisprudence, the majority view was that Ahlul Kitab are najas, and the minority view was that they are tahir. So, and this continued to come. Even I was reading the Jami' Abbasi of Shaykh al-Bahai the other day, and Shaykh Bahai is a Safavid, of course, jurist living at the time of Safavid era, and he wrote probably the first Persian Tawzih al-Masail, and others followed his style in writing Persian risalas and something like this. He also mentions in that there is a very, very minority view which says Ahlul Kitab are tahir, but the Shi'i mainstream opinion is that Ahlul Kitab are najas in that. Now, of course, the history always brings amazing turns. Now the opinion is turned. The majority view in Shi'i jurisprudence now in this generation has turned back to the minority view which was in the beginning of Shi'i history of jurisprudence. Among the later Shi'i jurists, I think the outstanding fatwa which we find not in the past generation but in the generation before that of jurists. Of course, when I say past generation of jurists, I mean Sayyid al-Khoyi, Imam Khomeini, and Ayatollah Golpayegani. This is the past generation of jurists. The generation which went before them is Ayatollah Burujerdi and Sayyid Mohsen al-Hakim and people like them. Among them, the only jurist who came to the fatwa of the minority and issued fatwa according to that was Sayyid Mohsen al-Hakim, who said Ahlul Kitab are tahir. Now the jurists tried to somehow justify this by saying I heard this justification, I remember several times, that Sayyid Mohsen al-Hakim, when he said Jews and Christians are tahir ritually, he meant that those who believe in the original opinion of Judaism and Christianity, which was Tawheed. Well, of course, we couldn't find any Jew or Christian nowadays who believe in the original opinion of Judaism or Christianity, which is Tawheed. So it would have, in effect, it would have made the fatwa ineffective, because then you have to look around, find such a person, discuss with a Christian and Jew, and analyze whether they believe in the original ideas of Judaism and Christianity or not, which of course it would not work. And I don't think Sayyid Mohsen al-Hakim would have mentioned would have issued such a fatwa. So he was the one who started this returning to the minority view of the Shia. The past generation of jurists, Sayyid Khoi, Ayatollah Golpayegani, Ayatollah Araki, Ayatollah Imam Khomeini, they all issued fatwa to the ritual impurity of Ahlul Kitab. Now, we have come to our own generation, the contemporary generation. The majority now issue fatwa to the ritual cleanness of Ahlul Kitab. And this is amazing how this has come about. And I think this is somehow the effect of maybe international communication and analyzing the riwayat of Tahara and Najasa in a new light. I remember a few years ago I was reading a book by a jurist called, a very famous jurist called Sayyid Abdullah Zanjani, who was a jurist of 9th century, of Islamic century, Islamic calendar. He has written a risala on the ritual purity of Ahlul Kitab. Now in that he mentions that I was a staunch supporter of the Shi'i majority view that Ahlul Kitab are ritually unclean, and I was discussing this with all jurists, and I used to prove this vehemently until it happened that I had to travel by a ship, and on that ship or boat or big boat, all the crew and the passengers were Christians, and it took several days, probably weeks, that I was on board, and I was of course regarding them ritually unclean. I had to be very careful when I wanted to pray, when I wanted to eat, and all these things. And of course I started to think that really is it practical if I want to issue such a fatwa. And when I of course came back from that journey, I started to analyze the riwayat again, and then I came to the conclusion that I was wrong. Actually the riwayat did not suggest that Ahlul Kitab are unclean. The only thing that they suggest is that when you get in touch with them, before you perform your salat, you do a wudu or wash yourself, not because they are ritually impure, just because you have come to contact with someone who's the carrier of an impure concept and opinion and idea. So now we see that the new generation of ulama, probably because of many different social factors, have come to the conclusion that the majority view, the mainstream view of Shias in the past was wrong, and the Ahlul Kitab, of course they are very cautious about this. They say ihtiyatul mustahab is that you avoid them in the sense of ritual purity and impurity. However, of course, the fatwa is that they are ritually clean. Now, the ulama who say that they are ritually clean, Mirza Jawad Agha Tabrizi, Ayatollah Fazil Lankarani, Ayatollah Sistani, Ayatollah Khamenei, Ayatollah Nuri, and we have now a minority like Ayatollah Bahjat, who mentions still the old majority view, and Ayatollah Safi, who I think are the utter minority among the ulama who mention the impurity, the purity of Ahlul, ritual purity of Ahlul Kitab. Now, I don't think it would be beneficial to bring all the riwayat which mentions the both views, because we are not jurists, we are not mujtahid to decide ourselves by going to the riwayat and see which is more powerful, which is less powerful, or it's all the implications of the riwayat, what the riwayat imply, which is a matter of discussion and disagreement. Those ulama who now have come to the conclusion that they are ritually clean, they don't say that other batch of riwayat are weak. They say that they do not imply what the majority view has been in the past. And always the minority view have been of this opinion that the implications you are drawing from these riwayat, you are finding from these riwayat, are not correct, and you are giving wrong implication to the riwayat of najasa and impurity. And this is the case, of course, according to Shi'i view today, in the contemporary era. Mushrikun and kuffar are ritually impure, Ahlul Kitab are ritually pure, and there is the minority view that they are impure ritually, and this is the actually turning upside down the mainstream Shia view, which has been there in the past, that the utter majority view was the impurity, and very little minority view was purity. I hope this would suffice for this discussion. If there is any question, inshallah, we will go through it later on. Now, let's continue with the verses. Now, verse number 29. قاتلوا الذين لا يؤمنون بالله ولا باليوم الآخر ولا يحرمون ما حرم الله ورسوله ولا يدينون دين الحق من الذين أوتوا الكتاب حتى يؤتوا الجزية عن يد وهم صاغرون. Fight those who do not have faith in Allah, nor believe in the last day, nor forbid what Allah and His Apostle have forbidden, nor practice the true religion from among those who were given the book, until they pay the tribute out of hand degraded. Now, this is...
It's a superiority.
Sorry, where?
This translation is superiority.
Which part? Could you
It says here,
read it after?
His apostle has prohibited nor follow the religion of the truth after those who have been given the book until they pay the tax in acknowledgement of superiority. Is that a correct translation?
In acknowledgement of
Superiority.
your superiority. Well, yeah, of course. It's the same thing. They are degraded. In acknowledgement of your superiority. Now, this verse is very interesting, and it has lots of theological implications for us, lots of theological implications for Muslims. Now, the core of the implication of the verse is that it is possible that someone be a member of a community, of a religious community, like Judaism or Christianity, whose main tenets are belief in God and in the hereafter, and still they do not believe in God and hereafter. Although they claim that they do not. And it would suggest that, well, among the Muslims it is possible that some group of Muslims would, of course, claim the belief in God, the belief in in the hereafter, but Allah would not regard them as believers as such. It says that those Ahlul Kitab who do not believe in God and in the last day. Now, how is it possible that some Ahlul Kitab who claim that they are Jews and they are Christians, but they do not believe that they be in a situation which God regards them as not having faith in Allah and in the hereafter? I think if we go through the Quran, we would see that just by saying that I believe in God and in the hereafter, you cannot meet the minimum requirements of becoming a mu'min. There are some other issues that you have to admit or to practice to be regarded as someone who really believes. It's not just something mentioned by the tongue. Of course, in Islam itself, we have this differentiation between Islam and Iman, between faith and submission. And the Quran itself would regard that anyone saying Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi, is not to be regarded as a believer, just to be regarded as a Muslim. And Muslim means someone who has submitted out of some force. Now that force might be force of the sword, force of the community, force of the birth. I mean, many of us are born Muslims, okay? This is the force of the birth, and we have no choice about it. And we grow up as such, and we continue saying, yes, of course we are Muslims, we believe there is one God, there is only the Muhammad, peace be on him, is the Prophet of God. But really, do we meet the minimum requirements of having faith in this? We might not. And therefore in Surah Hujurat, when the Arab, the Bedouins came to the Prophet en masse in the 9th year of Hijrah, and they submitted to Islam because they were afraid that if they do not submit, Prophet would wage a war against them. They came and said, we have faith in you. And Allah mentions that قَالَتِ الْأَعْرَابُ آمَنَّا. Arab have come to you and they say, we have faith. But you tell them that no, you do not have faith. They came and they uttered the shahadatain. Okay, they uttered the word, the kalima, that ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah, peace be on him. They uttered the kalima and they said, now we are Muslims. Now the Quran says, no, don't say that we are mu'min. Don't say that we are mu'min. قالت الأعراب آمنا. They say, we believe, we have faith. قل لم تؤمنوا. Say, nay, you do not have faith yet. ولكن قولوا أسلمنا. But say, we have submitted. Submitted in the sense that not submission of the heart, submitted to your power. Okay, we have submitted to that power. وَلَمَّا يَدْخُلِ الْإِيمَانُ فِي قُلُوبِكُمْ. But faith has not yet entered your hearts. So there is a minimum requirement for the faith to enter in the heart. And there is a minimum practice and conceptual understanding for faith which people should fulfill before they are called mu'min, and they are said to have belief in God, they are faith in God and in the hereafter. In many verses of the Quran we have Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu is a general term used for the followers of the Prophet, followers, companions of the Prophet. It's only that. It doesn't mean that it doesn't imply anything about the faith in the heart. Therefore we have Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu. Amanu, O you who believe, have faith. And it means that about Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, there might be some people who do not have faith. In Surah Hadid we have Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu attaqullah. O you who believe, fear God. Wa aminu bi rasulihi. And have faith in his apostle. It means that there might have been some people about those who believed Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, who, although they had faith in God, they did not have faith in his apostle or whatever he said. Of course, if we go to the history of Islam, we will see that this was the case. Many things Prophet said which were disobeyed even during his lifetime, and it came to very bitter arguments between him and his companions because of these differences of opinion. So they did not have faith in the apostle. They just thought him to be a person among other people, an individual among other individuals, the same way. So it is possible, and faith is something. To be member of a community is something else. We have in Surah Ibrahim, we have this verse which has been, of course, elaborately discussed by all exegetes. Alam tara ila alladhina baddalu ni'matallahi kufran wa ahallu qawmahum dar al-bawar. Have you not seen those who have exchanged the ni'mah of Allah with kufr, who have actually opted for kufr rather than accepting the ni'mah of Allah? Alam tara ila alladhina baddalu ni'matallahi kufran wa ahallu qawmahum dar al-bawar, and have ended up their people into the house of destruction, the place of destruction, Jahannam. Of course, it's Jahannam yaslawnaha wa bi'sal qarar. Now, both Sunni and Shia exegetes report lots of riwayat, both from the Prophet and from Ahlul Bayt, and that these are Banu Umayyah, who have exchanged the guidance of the Prophet, and Ni'matullah, who is the Prophet and his Ahlul Bayt, with kufr. And kufr, of course, you know that Banu Umayyah, all of them, after the conquest of Mecca, they offered their Islam, they confessed to Islam, and they had faith. And you couldn't say that they weren't faithful. All the Khulafa of Banu Umayyah, they tried to propagate Islam. They fought other nations in the name of Islam for converting them to Islam. And of course, they established the foundations of the civilization on the tenets of Islam. The jurists, of course, flourished in their time, and they were observing all the rulings of Islam in their course and everything. I mean, everything was Islamic. But the Quran does not accept this. It was just an apparent, a superficial type of acceptance. And Quran says they changed ni'matullah to kufr. They exchanged it with kufr, so to speak. And of course, we know when we go to the riwayat from Ahlul Bayt and the Prophet, we know that, and Amir Ali ibn Abi Talib, we know that, of course, they were not satisfied with that superficial Islam. And they were criticizing it very harshly, of course, secretly, not openly. And this is exactly the same thing which is mentioned in this in this verse, that Ahlul Kitab, although they say that they are Jews, although they say that they are Christians, although they say they believe in God, any concept of God that they believed in, although they say they believed in Jesus Christ, but they did not believe from the eyes of Allah. If you look from that perspective, they are not believers. They do not believe in God, they do not believe in the hereafter. It was just something being partaken to them from the past generations, and they said we are Jews and we are Christians. And this is why they deserve to be fought against, unless, of course, they submit to you. They submit to you, and they are degraded in the sense that وَهُمْ صَاغِرُونَ means in the sense that they are put in an inferior situation in terms of the faith. The faith is not the true faith which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is seeking. Of course, not all members of the community are like that, but the overall attitude of their community is like this. So it says, fight those who do not have faith in Allah and in the last day. Now, وَلَا يُحَرِّمُونَ مَا حَرَّمَ اللَّهُ وَرَسُولُهُ, nor forbid what Allah and His Apostle have forbidden. Now, وَرَسُولُهُ, his apostle, have two possibilities in explanation. One is that his apostle means the apostle in which they believed. So with regards to Jews, it means Musa alayhi salam. With regards to Christians, it means Isa alayhi salam. So although they are Jews and Christians, but they do not forbid what Allah and his apostle Musa and Isa would have forbidden. The other possibility is that no, Rasuluhu means Prophet Muhammad, peace be on him. And they would not forbid what Prophet Muhammad forbids, which of course probably would not be the best explanation, since we are now talking about Jews and Christians. وَلَا يَدِينُونَ دِينَ الْحَقِّ, nor practice the true religion. Now, دين الحق, haq here means God, of course, not truth. As we said, it's very difficult to translate haq into English, because it is a concept which could be seen from many different perspectives. Allah, of course, is haq, reality is haq, and what is reality is the truth. So it's a multifaceted type of concept, haq. Now, Deen al-Haq might mean the religion which is true as against the religions which are false. Or Deen al-Haq means the religion of God. And this would go with other, of course, perspectives of the religion of God in the Quran. You know, in the Quran we have that God only has one religion. There is the religion of God, which is Islam, which is submission. Not this Islam that we know, of course. There has been only one religion, right from the beginning of the history to the end of the history, and that religion has been Islam, submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Islam in its literal sense and term. And this is what, of course, Ibrahim had the will for his children, advised his children to follow, and Yaqub advised his children to follow. In Surah Ibrahim we have وَوَصَّى بِهَا إِبْرَاهِيمُ بَنِيهِ وَيَعْقُوب. Ibrahim and Yaqub advised his children that يَا بُنَيَّ إِنَّ اللَّهَ اصْطَفَى لَكُمُ الدِّينَ فَلَا تَمُوتُنَّ إِلَّا وَأَنْتُمْ مُسْلِمُونَ. You should not die but on Islam. And Islam therefore doesn't mean the religion of Prophet Muhammad, it means the religion of God. There has been only one religion during the history. And this is probably the meaning of the verse saying, إِنَّ الدِّينَ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ الْإِسْلَامِ. The religion with God is Islam. There is no other religion. وَمَنْ يَبْتَغِ غَيْرَ الْإِسْلَامِ دِينًا فَلَنْ يُقْبَلَ مِنْهُ. Whoever follows any religion other than Islam, it is not going to be accepted from them. And it means that it is the only religion of God. Now, this religion, of course, was preached by different prophets. And it is, of course, understandable, because God cannot have several religions. And human beings cannot have several paths towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There is one perfect path, and that is Islam. And that has been preached by Ibrahim, by Musa, by Isa, by Nuh. شَرَعَ لَكُم مِّنَ الدِّينِ مَا وَصَّى بِهِ نُوحًا. He has legislated for you the tenets which was being propagated, which was being given to Nuh and to Ibrahim and to Musa and to Isa. All these prophets, of course, had proselytized and had preached the same religion, which is the religion of Islam. Now here, Deen al-Haq means that one religion. That one. So they do not, of course, practice وَلَا يَدِينُونَ دِينَ الْحَقِّ. They do not practice the true religion, the true religion, of course, which is that one religion of God. They have actually made that one religion, they had colored it with their own desires, and they have separated it from the mainstream advancement of that religion. Well, especially in the case of the Jews, you see that they have made it a monopolized, a racist type of religion. They have somehow cut it off from that the religion of God, and they say this is our religion of the chosen people. And in the term of Christians, in this, with regards to Christians, they have completely cut it off from the Abrahamian religions, because Abrahamian religions say there is one God and there are prophets for that God. Now Christianity has completely cut itself off from the mainstream Abrahamian religions by saying that it is Jesus Christ, you have to only believe in Jesus Christ, he is the Son of God. This is something which had not been heard in Abrahamian religions previously. So they have completely cut off their religion from the Abrahamian religion. Both of them, I mean, both the Jews and Christians have cut off. فَتَقَطَّعُوا أَمْرَهُمْ بَيْنَهُمْ, as we have in Surah Anbiya, after speaking about this one religion of God being preached by all the prophets, then it said they cut off their own portion of this religion of God. What Musa preached them, they cut it off from this main religion. What Isa preached them, they cut it off from this main religion. فَتَقَطَّعُوا أَمْرَهُمْ بَيْنَهُمْ كُلُّ حِزْبٍ بِمَا لَدَيْهِمْ فَرِحُونَ. And each is quite happy and satisfied with what they have, which is a portion which is cut off from this main religion. So they have their own religion, but they do not practice the true religion of God, which is, of course, Islam being preached during the history. And this is an admonishment for us as well, that we shouldn't go in a way to cut this religion off from the mainstream religion of God which has been preached throughout the history. There has been only one ummah in the history regarded as Ummah Islamiyah, especially if you go to Surah Anbiya, it talks about Ibrahim, Nuh, Musa, Isa alayhi salam, Ayub, other prophets, and then it says at the end, Inna hadhihi ummatukum, this is your ummah. The Ummah Islamiyah is the ummah formed by Adam alayhi salam right from the beginning, coming through. It has its own main tenets, and if you want to cut off from this, you will become from among those who, again it mentions there, وَتَقَطَّعُوا أَمْرَهُمْ بَيْنَهُمْ كُلٌّ إِلَيْنَا رَاجِعُونَ. Of course, all will come back to us and will judge, but they cut off their own portion from the mainstream religion of God. So you fight these people, nor practice the true religion, مِنَ الَّذِينَ أُوتُوا الْكِتَابِ, from among those who were given the book. Now, of course, it admits that they were given books, so they are Ahlul Kitab, but they do not really believe in God and in the day of hereafter. حَتَّى يُؤْتُوا الْجَزْيَةَ عَنْ يَدٍ وَهُمْ صَاغِرُونَ, until they paid tribute out of hand. An yadan means well, it has two explanations. One is that they presently give you jizya, and yadan, for example, bay, which is yadan and yad, it means that presently a transaction which exchanges the price and the consignment in the same majlis, and this is an yadan, or that they pay the tribute admitting that they have to pay it, وَهُمْ صَاغِرُونَ, and they are degraded in the sense that they are degraded not, of course, as we have in some jurisprudential fatwas, that when you receive jizya from them you have to despise them or you have to humiliate them, but they know that they have to admit to this religion of God if they are living under your protection. They have to admit that this is the religion of God. Even though they do not believe it, they have to admit it. And then it goes on discussing some of the tenets which would make them to be inferior as compared to the religion of Islam, and that is, the Jews say Israel is the son of Allah and the Christians say Christ is the son of Allah. Inshallah, we'll discuss this next week. Wa sallallahu ala Muhammadin wa alihi tahirin.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sheikh, for your initial discussion on the issue of Najasat. And just a reminder, I remember what you heard about this, that the interpretation. We had also had another interpretation that we were asked that whenever we had a Christian house worker, we should make sure that when they come in the morning, they should wash their hands in front of us. So there was another interpretation that we came across, apart from what you had heard, that that they should be believing in the pure books of the Bible.
Yeah.
So, okay. Apart from that, okay, let's continue with the question.
Well, of course, what you have, that if you have a Christian housemaid, they have to wash their hands, is actually based on the opinion of the Tahara, because it presupposes that they are Tahir. However, they might have touched impure things like wine and pig and other things, and they have to wash their hand before starting, and that means that they are Tahir per se originally, but they might have become impure by touching impure things. Yeah.
I think Riaz read that in first.
Very much again for enlightening us. Sheikh, you mentioned the Mujtahid who traveled on a ship and he found difficulty in practicing Islam because of his circumstance. And one of the things that many of us who live remote from Muslim communities feel is that the ulama should come and perhaps experience what we experience, so that they could actually make rulings and interpretations that would be more sympathetic to our situations. And I'd like your opinion on that. But also, one of the things that concerns me is it appropriate? I mean, I don't know very much about hadith science, but is it appropriate to interpret hadith in the form of personal context? What concerns me is that the interpretation is then changed because of one's own personal experience. And that in itself is dangerous. For example, if, just to give you an example to illustrate my point, if somebody looks at the evidence for a particular kind of medicine and comes to the conclusion that on an epidemiological basis, in the terms of the whole population, that treatment does not work, and then by chance they are afflicted by the same illness and they take that medicine and they feel better for it, that might have been spontaneous. It's not the medicine that's working, but if they changed their ruling or opinion to say that this medicine is now effective, it could have a detrimental effect on the population, because they now accept that that ruling is correct. And the evidence doesn't prove it.
Yeah.
How do you feel about it?
Sorry, what was the first bit of the...
The first was, should the ulama be traveling to...
Yeah. Well, of course they should, I think, because, it's all the time the case, just by reading the books, without having any experience in any field of study, in social sciences, even in pure sciences, and even in religious sciences, you cannot say, I just studied the book and come to a conclusion. It is very difficult. You have to experience different situations. And I think the ulama, of course, because when we talk about the ulama, we don't talk about the ulama sitting in one place. We talk about the collective body of the ulama who live everywhere. And when they all together come to a conclusion or an ijma, it means that they have experienced all those things. Now, this issue is much more palpable with regards to Hajj. If an alim has not gone to Hajj, has not actually performed Hajj, and wants to issue fatwa about different circumstances of Hajj, then you would find his instructions very difficult to follow, because they just see, of course, there is these two, we have these two opinions or hadith, and which one is closer to caution. Of course, one is all the time in religious issues inclined to caution. So he says, okay, this is more cautious, so I issue fatwa according to this. Say, for example, that you have to do tawaf between Maqam Ibrahim and between the house. Okay. Now, if an alim has performed Hajj himself, he probably wouldn't opt for this fatwa, although it is closer to caution. But it would see that it is impractical. It's not practical. It's very difficult to follow. Or some other issues with regards to Hajj. And therefore the ulama usually say, before you issue any fatwa about Hajj, you have to perform Hajj yourself. to see the practicalities of the subject. However, of course, one can sit, study the books, and issue fatwa which is closer to caution. And of course, this would make everything life difficult for the followers. And if a follower as well is inclined towards cautiousness, then that fatwa would be good, but not very much practical. The ulama, yes, my brother lives in Finland, and at sometimes he has, of course, repeatedly said that one mujtahid should come and live in Finland for a while to see how we have problem with our salat and with our fasting. It's not only the problem of the length of the day. It's the problem of the sun not touching the horizon at all at some times, and before touching the horizon going up, of course it gets dark a little bit, but well, it's not touching the horizon. When we should pray subh, when we should pray maghrib, and what is the ruling about fasting and all these things. So before an alim goes there and finds out about all these things and practicalities, and for example, if fasting becomes 22 hours, what you do, or 23 hours, that's really at sometimes it becomes 23 hours. So you do your maghrib, your isha, you eat, you do your subh, and I mean you have little time even to do all these things. So yes, it's important, I think. Now, with regards to interpretations according to practicalities and ease, I think we always have to find a balance here. That when a jurist wants to issue a fatwa, of course we have to analyze the text very carefully. We have to see what is our backgrounds which might somehow betray us in this. There is another issue in Shi'i jurisprudence which have had the same faith almost until 7th century. All Shi'i jurists had said, except a very small minority, had said that the well water would have become impure by touching an impure things. This is not the fatwa now, of course. All the ulama, not even the majority, exactly the whole Shi'i jurist community would say that the water of the well would not become impure by touching an impure thing. It's just like khor and like water of the sea or something else. Now, this turned, of course, in the 7th century by the fatwa of Allama al-Hilli. Now, what he did, he wanted to go to the riwayat and find out this argument. There was the argument there, of course. And he had a well in his house. And of course, having a well in your house and you have lots of difficulties if the water of the well is affected by impurity, you are inclined to issue the fatwa that it wouldn't. Now, what he did first, he filled his own well. He closed it. He just put dust in it and closed it. I said, I'm not going to use my own well from now on. I bring water from outside so that I am not influenced by my tacit or unconscious desire that this fatwa would be better. And then he issued that fatwa, which of course revolutionized the whole Shi'i jurisprudence in this, and all other ulama followed him because of the strength of his argument that he brought for it later on. However, this is something which I think which is natural. And this is why we say ijtihad, whatever fatwa a jurist come about, would not give us certainty. It is a dhanni, it is conjectural. Conjectural in the sense that he might have been affected by his situation, he might have been affected by his understanding, he might have been affected by many different factors. And it might not be the real ruling of the Prophet and A'immah alayhimus salam. So it is conjectural, but we have no other choice but to follow this conjecture. It is not possible and even not desirable to ask a jurist to isolate themselves completely from all the environment and circumstances and then issue a fatwa, because then they might end up with fatwa which could not be practiced at all. It would not be practical at all. So we have to find a balance in this all the time, I think.
Riyadh, want to add something?
Just context of your, you said that there's a very vibrant community in Qom at the moment. Do you see a move? Will we see in our lifetime that these major ulama, this Maraj, actually traveling out and living in the West to see what it's like? Do you see that happening?
But this is happening now, I think, and it's not only the matter of living; it's the matter of being aware of what's going on. I mean, even you see Imam Khomeini, he gave fatwa which are completely against the mainstream current of Shi'i jurisprudence. I mean, what he said about the music is something which, I mean, the Sufis in the past had having hard time to speak about sama, whether it is listening to melodies, even not with musical instruments, just melodies being sung. They had tough time to discuss this issue and convince others that what we are doing is lawful. And now you will see that Imam Khomeini comes up with the idea that no, music is not haram, for example. Or many other things that he has brought in terms of the way a government should be run. I mean, his fatwa are, in most instances, completely against the mainstream fatwa of the ulama. I mean, his ideas about the parliament, about having a government, a faqih being checked all the time by some other bodies. I mean, these are the things which are completely new and have brought about lots of other discussions in Qom. And this is why I say it's quite vibrant at the moment. Yeah.
Can we go to sisters first before we come to Firoz? Sisters? Okay, well, the sister getting ready for us.
Thank you again. You know, when you mentioned, when you started the thing, again on that same point, you said that there was, and there is still, a total consensus regarding the mushrikun and those who disbelieve, the kuffar. And you said that even though, I don't know if I heard you correctly, but you said that even though there is no hadith, there is ijma. Is that what you said?
Yeah. Yeah.
Could you elaborate? Because it seems that then if there is no hadith, and if Quran is silent on that specifically, then how does that ijma come about?
Well,
is it just an intuitive sense of the sense of religion and or what is it? And how does one because the other thing I want to ask you is in a country like India, for example, okay, in the West we are fortunate at least that we can say this is Ahlul Kitab, and because of the ruling we might be able to find it less difficult to practice it. But there are places where Muslims are there where there is no Ahlul Kitab.
Yeah.
And India seems to be an example with 120 million Muslims by some counts. How do you, in a day-to-day basis, live in a place where the majority host community is considered to be najis?
Well, actually, ijma as a jurisprudential concept is an authority if it is not based on a hadith. If it is based on the hadith, then we have no ijma. We have that hadith according to which the ulama have issued fatwa. Okay, so when we say there is an ijma, of course we might mean that there is a unanimous fatwa which might be based on hadith, on Quran or whatever. But ijma per se is when you have no hadith but you find all the ulama have issued fatwa according to that, and it means there has been some origin for this which is lost to us. Okay, now one important issue here is that when the ulama discuss about the purity and impurity of Ahlul Kitab, if they say that we have in some ahadith that Ahlul Kitab are najis, then they say by the rule of awlawiyya, that means that by priority, certainly mushrikun would be najis. If Ahlul Kitab are najis, who are the people of the book, then by priority mushrikun would be najis. However, this is not the origin of the fatwa. The origin of the fatwa is an ijma which has come down right through the time of A'imma alayhimus salam, and every jurist have issued fatwa according to that, although we have no hadith about it. And this is what makes the whole case very strong, because when you say there is a hadith, then you go to the implications of that hadith and the chain of that hadith, whether it's weak or strong, whether it implies the same thing or it does not imply that thing. But when there is ijma, of course ijma is when you don't have all these, but you have strong unanimous opinion about something in all Shia lands, among all Shia circles, among all Shia ulama. Yeah.
Any sister? No, Nisa?
I come back to this boat ride. This is one thing that none of us, by the way, will forget, the boat ride. It is just a commentary here, although I have got a little question I'll come to at the end. We must make it very clear, and I think you did say that, when this jurist, whose name in 9th century, was it Zanjani?
Sayyid Abdullah Zanjani, yeah.
When he went back, I don't think it was just his experience, really, that made him change his mind. The experience was a trigger. He went back to the hadith. He looked at both sides of the argument, and he then started interpreting his side of the argument in a different manner. But the origins did not change, and his final ruling was based on the origins, not his own experience. That was just a trigger factor. So similarly, just taking Riaz's analogy, the scientist goes back to the research that has been put out from epidemiological studies and reinterprets that rather than his own experience. So that was just my comment to just make it quite clear that ulama, even exposed to the Western world or whatever, do not just, because of their own personal experience, change the ruling. They just revisit and interpret it differently. My question is simply, taking Riaz's point about ulama visiting the West, Feroz took it one step ahead. Ulama should probably visit India to see what the outcome is. And it is the Indian question that I really want to ask, because we know very well that one prominent Ayatollah has interpreted Hindus as tahir, ritually tahir. And I'm happy for you not to answer if you haven't read it, but I'd like you to tell me, on what basis did he come to that conclusion?
Well, maybe they have regarded them as Ahlul Kitab. Right from the beginning, the interpretation of Ahlul Kitab was controversial among jurists. I mean, even including Majus or Zoroastrians in Ahlul Kitab. Because Jews and Christians are the two outstanding members of Ahlul Kitab, but whether we could include Saba'ites or Majus, Zoroastrians, or any other in Ahlul Kitab, it was controversial. Of course, we know that general opinion is that Majus or Zoroastrians are Ahlul Kitab. Now, about Buddhists, there is a type of opinion about among some Muslim ulama that Buddha was really a prophet of God, and he came to somehow rectify the deviations which had happened in Hindu religion. And Hinduism in the beginning was a religion of monotheism, which was actually diverted by belief in reincarnations of God. It happened in Christianity only once, but I think in Hinduism it happens every several years, that God finds that there is some difficulty on the earth and he comes to rectify it and goes back, and again everything goes wrong. Now, about Buddhists, it is possible to think that Buddha was a prophet and Buddhists might be Ahlul Kitab. I remember in his Darsul Kharij, Ayatollah Khamenei once mentioned this, that if it is proved, we don't know, but if it is proved that Buddhists are Ahlul Kitab and Buddha was a prophet and had a book, then we could regard them as Ahlul Kitab and as Tahir and treat with them as we treat Ahlul Kitab. Now, if we could extend this to Hindus, which is much more difficult, of course, because Buddhists are not mushrik in a sense. To the extent that Christians we could regard as mushrik, we could regard them in the same way, but they are not like Hindus. But Hinduism, it would be very difficult unless, I mean, someone says that yes, they had a prophet, and that prophet, because about Zoroastrians, when they asked the prophet whether they are Ahlul Kitab, in a hadith we have, and Amirul Mu'mineen also, he said yes, they had a prophet and they had a book written on 12,000 cow skins, and it was later on deviated. If we can find that origin, then of course we could regard them as Ahlul Kitab. But to find that, I think, is not something that we could do in our generation.
So just to add to that, if I may, and coming to the ayah that we discussed, I mean, shouldn't the benefit of doubt be on the basis that 124,000 prophets were sent to every nook and corner of the world? Every tribe, every community had a prophet, full stop. You've got no right to interpret it any other way. So everyone inherently is submissive in its original Islamic sense. And everyone is tahir, full stop. What's wrong about that? Where would we go wrong? Who will fall? Who will become ill?
Well, if you become a mujtahid, inshallah, we will have an easy life. In this world and in the next.
Sisters,
here we have.
yeah, we have to take the turn, please. Sisters?
You mentioned about the situation of Bani Umayyah, is their accepting of Islam and then turning it back and rejecting it in a way. And this is the opinion, as you said, is common with all the Shias and most of the Sunnis. If you can throw some light that in spite of having this understanding, how did they become so prominent in the Islamic history? Like Muawiyah and then Usman, and how did they become so prominent in the Islamic history?
Of course, when we talk about Banu Umayyah, we do not talk originally about Uthman, because although he originated this power given to Banu Umayyah, but we have to separate Uthman from the Banu Umayyah we are talking about. It starts from Muawiyah, and then it comes down to Banu Marwan, especially Banu Marwan, and what followed afterwards. However, of course, all these are politics, and politics writes the history, and politics is when you have power, you have the power to interpret everything as well, and you have the power to write the history as well. We have a problem now, even in Iran, about writing the history of the Islamic Revolution. I mean, who is going to write it, and what authority? And if you write it against the current authority, certainly you are not going to be given the permission to promote it. So it's always the case that when you write the history at a time, you usually, especially in old times, nowadays we have democracy, we have different NGOs and all these things which exert pressure. In old days, it was whatever the king said. And that's why they have become so prominent in the history of Islam, and how, of course, they created a literature which remained in the bulk of Islamic literature as hadith or as history and other things, which is very, very difficult to wipe out, and therefore their prominence is there.
You go to sisters? No, Muhammad?
Sheikh, there are two merchants that apparently allow the eating of food from mushriks, and that is the Qulullah, and there was Ayatollah Sabzwari in Najaf. I don't know whether he's alive or not. He also said that the mushriks are not najis. In the case of Sayyid Fadlullah, he said even kafirs are not najis.
Yeah, I forgot to say this. Yes, apart from Ayatollah Jannati, Ayatollah Fadlullah also has this view. As I said, the view has come originally from Qom. All the views come originally from Qom. It's the origin of making all these views on jurisprudence. But Sayyid Fazlullah has taken up the view as well. But as I said, this is complete minority in Shia jurisprudence during the history.
But my question is there a difference between najas and najis? Because I heard that the Sunnis say that, when this ayah says, إِنَّمَا الْمُشْرِكُونَ نَجَسٌ, it does not say najis, and that's why they are not unclean.
Now, they make a difference between najas, which is mentioned in the verse, and najas. And they say najas is spiritually impure, and najas is ritually impure. However, making this difference is very difficult, I think.
Sisters? No? Okay, doctor.
Just two questions. Did I hear you right saying that a person is regarded as mushrik if he doesn't accept the prophethood of our holy prophet? If so,
Kafir.
kafir.
Would regard kafir, yes.
So the Jews and the Christians, they do not accept our prophet. So will they not be regarded as kafirs?
No, the
Mushriks?
Ahlul Kitab are excluded from this. They say a person not accepting the prophethood of the prophet or a necessary concept of Islamic faith, except Jews and Christians who are regarded to be Ahlul Kitab. Yeah.
Secondly, you said that because of the international communications, does that mean that there is political pressure on the Shias on the Shias to regard Ahlul Kitab as Tahir?
No, I don't mean that. I mean the same thing as Brother Nizam mentioned, that is revisiting the texts and a new enlightenment which gives new understanding to whatever the ulama have already issued fatwa according to it. So it's always putting you in new light rather than pressurizing you. And this is what is happening at the moment, I think.
Okay, we'll take two more questions, one preferably from sisters. Sister ready?
Well, the sisters don't like after ask question. You insistently.
Brother, is that you, Omar?
Sheikh, it's a twofold question, really. Continuing with the Najasa issue, because it seems it's a favorite issue today. The discussion centers so far just on those religions that were present once Islam came. And I've got a problem, theologically fiqhy, to do with what happens with those religions are post-Islam, we can say. Because it would be simple just to say, well, they're kuffar, but they're usually sort of fitted amongst Ahlul Kitab related religions. I mean, for example, from Christianity we have the Mormons, we have the Jehovah's Witnesses, and when you compare their aqaid, their beliefs, and you study them, and you compare them with mainstream Christianity, probably they're closer to Hinduism and Buddhism sometimes. I mean, they're so far away. And even within Islam, I mean, we've got from the Shias came things like different sects that split away, like Ismailis, and the Gulad Shias, and then we got Baha'is, and then even from the Sunnis, you got the Qadianis, and even with the problem with the Qadianis, I mean, the Sunnis have declared them kuffar, but according to Imam Hamin al-Juwayni, in his book on Aqaid, he discusses that nobody can be called a kafir if he disbelieved in Usuluddin, not out of a bias, but out of an explanation for it that just happens to be different. And in the case of Qadianis, for example, the problem is about Prophet being Hatam al-Anbiya, and they're just reinterpreting the meaning of Hatam. And I mean, they create a problem for me. I mean, how should I treat them as? Are they kuffar? Are they to be considered Ahlul Kitab? I mean, how can I deal with them?
Yeah. With regards to ghulat on the one hand and nawasib on the other, we have explicit fatwa. I mean, whenever this fatwa is mentioned, ghulat and nawasib are mentioned as well, that they are najis. So ghulat in the Shia, those who exaggerate the station of A'imma, and nawasib on the other hand, those who have enmity with the A'imma, they are najis. This is mentioned explicitly. Now, with regard to other issues, I don't think the ulama have really discussed it, because this would make everything very much more complicated. I think we regard whoever believes to be a Christian and Jew, and say, for example, Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses. I don't think we. Yes, separate, but they believe in Jesus Christ certainly, and they believe that the reality. Of course, the Mormons would believe in a new prophet, so to speak. I don't know. They haven't discussed these issues, and with regard to anyone who denies the Khatamiyya of the Prophet, I think this is one of the necessary concepts of Islam, which they say if someone denies a necessary concept of Islam as well, rejecting the prophethood of the Prophet Muhammad and rejecting one of the necessary concepts. And I think Khatamiyya is one of the necessary concepts, which of course would lead to the fatwa, to impurity. However, I think we better, with regards to Ahlul Kitab, we better not to complicate it, because then we have to come into very, very difficult, elaborate discussions which would have little interest really. Yeah.
Last question, sisters. First.
You're describing that the view that Al-Qutaba Tahir was an utter minority for 1,000 years,
yeah,
and now it's become a majority. And now Sayyid Fazlullah's opinion is an utter minority. I mean, the way it's going, that might change as well, or can it?
Yeah, who knows? But this Najasa of Mushrikun was unanimous among Shias. It was Ahlul Kitab who were all the time an issue of discussion. But about Mushrikun we had consensus. Now, of course, then you can say there was a dispute between Shias and Sunnis in this. And now this discussion might lead to Shias accepting that view of purity of Mushrikun as well. Well, who knows? I mean, we follow our Mujtahidun. Whatever they say, we don't know what comes in future.
From Sayyid Fazlullah, why is he breaking the consensus? I don't understand.
Well, because this is his view, his opinion.
Do we have an understanding of what that opinion is? What would he be thinking that was different from everybody else? Has he said it?
Well, probably he would say that I do not regard ijma to be an authentic source for religious fatwa. And Al-Khoyi, of course, Al-Khoyi, when he discusses jurisprudence, he says in his jurisprudence book, he says that yes, ijma has not a strong basis, but in his fatwa he never opposes ijma. Even he does not oppose mashhur, which is much lower than ijma. So we have this difficulty that, of course, when it comes to fatwa, the ulama are very cautious. So yes, this might be the basis for his fatwa. Yeah.
Okay, I'm breaking my own sort of promise. Any sisters still want to ask? No?